Hello, amateurs, and welcome to another episode of Hot Topics. And we're doing a series here on the hot topics of tactical things that we might see during the World Cup or any other game for that matter. And I've got Tom Hicks with me here today to discuss this. Tom, how are you?
I'm very well, Tim. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, the first topic that we're going to look at in this tactical series is unstructured possession. So, very simple question to start off with, Tom. What exactly is unstructured possession?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a great question. It's one of those questions that needs to be answered because it's definitely a phrase that's banded around a lot. Um, Unstructured possession is essentially possession that originates from an unstructured source or unplanned source. So, structured possessional sources are things like your scrum and line out or penalties, so that you know you can plan what you're going to do with the ball and you've got that planned phase. Unstructured is anything that comes on a kick return or a turnover or any time you get possession of the ball when you weren't expecting it, basically.
Right, and I guess that could sort of happen sort of during phase play as well, if play doesn't develop as you expected, would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of take the definition as deep as you want to in terms of what constitutes unstructured play. And teams lose their structure quite quickly. Teams that generally we see at the World Cup who are playing the best with the ball are the teams that have the best resilience in their shape. So they have the ability to go multi-phase and they have the ability to keep that structure and keep their shape. If it all falls apart and things don't go quite as well as they want, maybe their nine has to go into the ruck or their 10 gets that taken out or something, then they can lose their structure as well. But generally speaking, in terms of analyzing games, unstructured possession is possession that comes, from a turnover or a kick return or something like that, where you've got it and you haven't planned for it. And at tier one level, so in the tier one test, so Six Nations, Rugby Championship, those kind of things, it's around 60% of your possessions in every game comes from an unstructured source.
Wow, so it's a lot, basically.
Yeah. So it's more than what you have on structured possession. So for those coaches out there that are listening, it gives you an insight as to what you might want to put more emphasis on when you're coaching. It's set your team up to be good off unstructured play rather than potentially off structured play, simply because you're going to get more of those kick returns, more of those turnovers, more of those opportunities to attack on unstructured possession.
Interesting. Okay, then. So now that we know that unstructured is typically the majority share, what kind of options would teams have to attack from unstructured play?
So it really depends on how you set your team up. So inherently, unstructured possession sources can be can be a bit chaotic. Some teams thrive on that chaos, and some teams don't like that chaos. So if you look at England particularly, they'll generally try and get into an attacking shape before they then look to capitalise on the unstructured possession source. So that might be that they play off nine, try and get into their attack shape, and then go and play. Some teams, generally speaking, like New Zealand or Fiji, obviously being the prime example, it's speed over shape is the kind of catchphrase that gets banded around. Harlequins do it a lot. They call it speed over shape. So don't worry about getting into shape. Let's just go and look for a soft shoulder. Let's go and look for a hole. Look for an attacking opportunity. And then as a coach, you then put in your kind of first principle thinking, your first objectives on an unstructured possession source. And the one that people will have heard of most commonly probably is two passes. You'll hear coaches screaming two passes, get the ball two passes away from the unstructured possession where it originates from on the catch or on the turnover. It depends on what you want, what you're looking for as a coach, and what your players are comfortable doing. But generally speaking, the opportunities that you'll get on a kick return, for example, are things like what I call fault lines. And that's how teams set themselves up where they've got potentially forwards maybe on the halfway and the catchers back on the 22. If they run return it, one of the opportunities might be to run basically at one of their players, and they create what I call a fault line in the defensive in the kick chase line. Good examples of that are the try that Capewazzo set up when Wales lost to Italy. If you look at his kick return, he ran basically at an Italian player, and that guy basically acted as a blocker, but without changing his line, so that he could go through a hole that he's created. So there's different opportunities you can look for, but whether you look for them or not depends on how you set up on structured possession.
Okay, interesting. I want to pick up on the phrase that you used there, and it's certainly something that I heard many times and used as a coach, and that is the two passes shout. What do you think about that exactly?
I think in principle it's a sensible thing to shout. It's kind of an entry level point into building some structure off an unstructured source. So if your team know you're going to move it two passes away, the players on the outside of the ball can start to get in alignment and start to get a bit of structure or plan together, because you know that every time we get the ball in a kick return or an unstructured source, so from a turnover example, that ball is going to get moved 2 passes. What it does, particularly on a kick, is it immediately starts questioning the defense. If I'm under a high ball and I catch it and then I run, I've not challenged that defender to make any decisions. I've made all the decisions for him or her, because I've caught it, I've looked at it, I've caught it, and I've run. All they've got to do is tackle me. If I catch it and move it, suddenly that chasing defender's then got to make a decision. Does he stick with me or she stick with me? Or do they push onto the ball carrier? And then suddenly you're asking questions. If you move it again, then you're also switching the point of attack maybe 20 meters, and you're also asking 2 questions of the chasers, and you start stretching their connectivity on the kick chase without really doing much apart from just catching and passing. And one of the coaching phrases that also gets banned around is the catch, pass, reload. So if you see a three player defensive in the backfield, one will catch it. And generally speaking, they'll be on an edge because teams kick to corners. The catch and then the pass into the middle player, and then you reload. So then suddenly you've got a 2-sided attack. You've got 3 players going with one on the ball. Whereas if you attack from the player on the edge, there's only one side of attack. So you catch it, move it, and then reload. And suddenly you're then in a position to go and attack a defender with 2 options.
Yeah, and 2 options means 2 different things for the defenders to think about. I agree with
Yeah.
everything you've just said. My only thought about the 2 pass thing is, what if the gap is directly in front of you? What if it's, like a knock on turnover and the gap's directly in front of you? That would be the only sort of pushback I'd do on that.
Yeah, and that's when, as a coach, you need to be really mindful of not over coaching players, because on inherently with unstructured possession, it's chaotic. You can't plan for it to be, exactly. You can't replicate it exactly in training as you would do in a game, because things happen. There's 30 players roaming the pitch. There's going to be a moment when you haven't planned for exactly that picture, and so you need to give your players the confidence and the ability to be able to look at what's in front of them and make an informed decision without over coaching them to do 2 passes or a kick straight away or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, just sort of like bringing this back to the World Cup and the teams that we're likely to see in the quarterfinals. How do the teams vary? Which teams really value unstructured possession? Which teams value structured possession, and why?
So yeah, I mean, speaking to the England players, particularly the England team, generally you'll see them preferring structured play. And the ways that when you're watching the games, you can infer that is what they do when they get kicked the ball. Generally speaking, if we're on our halfway line, or if we're anywhere in our own half, or if we're on or near the halfway, we don't really have much appetite to run return it. We don't really have any inclination to try and look for a space or look for a fault line, and go for it. We generally kick it back to try and manufacture a better opportunity. Now, it's getting a lot of bad press and it's getting a huge amount of fans angry about it. But when you look at it on a macro scale, rather than just that one kick, you look at what they're trying to achieve by returning it the way they do. They're trying to manufacture the probability to be on their side to get a better scoring opportunity. So teams like England, Wales, particularly as well, will look to kind of get some structure back off unstructured play before they then go and try and capitalize on it. The best example is Fiji. If you kick the ball to Fiji and they've got even a sniff of a chance of getting a soft shoulder or finding a little corner, they're going to take it. And what is really interesting about Fiji now is they're starting to develop into a team that doesn't always just run return it. They're starting to become a team that uses the kick as a positive attacking threat. So they capitalize on the unstructured possession either by run returning or by looking to put in a sort of a competitive kick. So rather than booting it back into the 22, it's a chip over the top, it's a crossfield kick. It's something that's going to challenge the defense in a different way. So teams that prefer structure, generally Northern Hemisphere teams, generally speaking. But if you look at the way that France have been playing recently, and Scotland as well, you could probably counter that with a fair few examples. Generally speaking, Fiji are probably the best example for looking at some unstructured play and capitalising it with the ball in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you mentioned a few of these things already, but what kind of factors might influence the decision making when it comes to unstructured possession? I'm thinking sort of, maybe field position, score, match time, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously the context and within which your possession is originating within. So yeah, the score or the position on the pitch is going to dictate what you're more inclined to do with it. What you'll see a lot of the time, particularly say if you look at it on a macro scale, is teams, particularly with the kick, trying to manipulate their unstructured possession to be as structured as possible. So that's why that kick tennis game is so interesting as a coach to watch, because what they're trying to do is manipulate each other to put a kick into an area that we want it to be in so we can go and attack from it. And so those kind of factors influence it, whether it's a kick that you feel like you can get some return on, or whether you feel like it's a turnover that you're in a good position to go through. I mean, if you look at the where Jack Morgan hit that 50-22 in the Australia game, that's an unstructured possession source, but the clock's nearly at the red. They've, they're in a bit of under a little bit of pressure. You get an unstructured possession source from a lost line out, and you're in your 22 against Australia. What do? Do you look to move it 2 passes in play? Probably not. You probably look to get it off the pitch. And that famous clip where Dan Biggar was screaming at George North for having a go from under their post against Fiji, you get you get the ball in that environment. You would say probably look to get it off the pitch or try and get a bit of territory. In other environments, you get a turnover within their 22 or in their half. Potentially, if you need to score or whatever it is, then that will dictate what you're doing as well. But ultimately, especially at the top level where they're coached a lot, the overriding dictating factor of what they do with their unstructured possession is down to how they train and what they do with it in training.
Right. And I guess let's try and bring this back to sort of club coaches, maybe within the UK, watching this. How would you sort of suggest they go about deciding how much time they should spend on structured versus unstructured possession?
I think the best way to do it is to try and watch maybe 2 games back from the season. I know not everybody has the luxury of a video or something, but if you can find someone with a video camcorder type thing, it's not ideal, but it's worth having sort of 2 or 3 games filmed and just literally just noting in binary form when you get your possession. So you just have a column for structured, column for unstructured, tick, 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 and you just see over the course of 2 games which is getting more and which is getting less. That can then start dictating as to what maybe the appetite for your turnover rate is like, what your appetite in the league you're in is for the other teams to kick it to you. Some teams don't kick it at all. There's coaches out there that will not let teams kick, even now. And so you can start sort of managing your team to play against pitches that they're going to be presented with more often than not. But a really good way to do it is, literally just to have a little tally marker of how many times do we get a turnover? How many times do we get, an unstructured possession source from a messed up line out or a kick or a handling error or whatever, and then start implementing that more into your training. But the key thing as a coach is to have your way of doing it. So what do you want to do off unstructured possession? Are you going to go down the Borthwick route of get our shape as quickly as possible? Are you going to go down the Salman Raului route of let's just go and play? And then, or you're going to be somewhere in the middle. And then as a coach, once you've got your principle sorted, you can then disseminate that to your team.
Nice. Perfect. Okay. As we bring this one to a close, Tom, have you got anything else you want to sort of say about unstructured possession?
I think it's one of the areas of the game where players can have the most effect on it. I think when you have like we said earlier with players not being overcoached, you made the great point of if there's a hole in front of you, take it. If you're on an unstructured source of possession, it's in that transitional phase. Look to try and be as effective as you possibly can. I would always say to my players, back yourself. If you see something, go for it. If you make an error, don't worry about it because you're trying to be positive. And more often than not, the teams that have the most positive actions in a game are the ones that come out on top because they're the ones that are forcing it. They're the ones that are going to get penalties. They're the ones that are going to get red zone entries because they're trying to be positive. Someone kicks you the ball or you get a turnover, have a look, go. Really try and do something exciting with it because in those moments, that transitional, I know we're going to speak about that as well, that transitional moment in a game is so important to scoring tries. And if you can be as effective as you possibly can be in that moment, you're going to be a hell of a player.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Now you've teased it nicely there. We're going to be doing future programs here on transition versus possession and why teams kick so much. And we've led into that very nicely. So people at home, if you've got any questions or sort of any further thoughts on what we've discussed here, then get it in the comments down below. And give us a thumbs up while you're down there and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next 2 episodes in this series. So just leaves me to say, Tom, thanks very much.
Hey, no, thank you very much, Tim. Good to see you.
No worries. And get out and play.